The weird piece of paper looked dangerous. There was something disturbingly familiar about the letter before me. The handwriting was all pretty curves.
You're in a computer game, Max.
The truth was a burning green crack through my brain, weapon statistics hanging in the air glimpsed out of the corner of my eye, endless repetition of the act of shooting, time slowing down to show off my moves, the paranoid feel of someone controlling my every step. I was in a computer game. Funny as hell, it was the most horrible thing I could think of.
Max Payne is one of those titles that set a bar in game development. Bullet time is such a robust mechanic that 2 console generations later, we still see action games incorporated as part of their combat systems. Like any title that made it big, Max Payne spawned a ton of Me Too games. Bullet time was to the early 2000s, as stop-and-pop shooting was to the 2010s. Out of all the imitators, El Matador is the one that feels the most inspired by Max Payne. By which I mean, it's dead-ass Max Payne, but with a few tweaks to the core mechanics. You ever play a game and can tell right off the bat what its influences are? That's El Matador, but the only influence was Max Payne. How it plays, how you move, how the camera feels. If you've played the Remedy titles, you'll feel right at home. As to those gameplay tweaks El Matador made, they're minute, but somewhat alter the experience. The most obvious change, and the one that colored my initial impressions with the game, is that enemies don't seem to have a particular shot pattern. In the early parts of Max Payne, the enemies have semi-automatic pistols and pump-action shotguns. These weapons created a rhythm for the player to follow when learning the ropes of combat. This rhythm let the player move around in real time because they learned which weapons will pose a higher risk and how to navigate through shots to avoid the enemy's tracking. Once enemies start getting automatic weapons, the player already had a feel for how shots will disperse in real time, so the player knows when to move when they're out of meter. You cannot run around in real time in El Matador without taking damage. As far as I've noticed, the enemies don't have a set attack pattern. As soon as a player is out of cover, shots are going off. What aggravates this is the second issue, which is that enemies are far more accurate in El Matador than Max Payne. Like, they will just track you, instead of being just slightly slower to allow some chance at dodging their shots, like in Max Payne. This is what initially turned me off with the gameplay. I thought the dev team really liked Remedy's design, but wanted to kick it up a notch. You know how a fan game can be made with the intention of catering to the die-hard percentage of the fandom? The ones who only play the game on the hardest difficulty at this point? That's what I thought El Matador was going for. So I ended up playing the game like a cover shooter. I'd stop and pop out of cover, and use bullet time to let me focus fire targets before they could react. When I described the gameplay as Max Payne but as a cover shooter, I'd gotten the obvious joke. Don't you mean Max Payne 3? See, at least cover is properly incorporated into 3's combat, and you can dive into cover and immediately snap to it. Also, having replayed some of the first 2 levels of 3, you can at least run around in real time and avoid damage like in the Remedy titles. So because of the enemy's increased damage and accuracy, I actually ended up not playing El Matador like a Max Payne, to my detriment and to the game's. I gave this game a negative review on Steam because of those first impressions. I still carried that sentiment up until the day before I rewrote the script for this video. I was recording Max Payne gameplay to provide comparison footage, but remembered that shoot dodging was the optimal movement in Max Payne 1 because it spent less meter and minimized any damage the player would take from enemy fire. So I thought, before I bury this game again, how does El Matador play with shoot dodging? I was so wrong. This game isn't some ROM-hacked Max Payne. This is Max Payne as fuck. Compare all the damage I took in these fights to when I'm John Wooing everywhere. The best way to really show it off is when I fought the boss at the end of the first chapter. I saw how chuffy this guy was and was like, ugh, Why make a boss in a game like this that takes a shitload of damage but can rip into you with 3 shots? Now look at him when I jumped into his face with an AK. In hindsight, I shouldn't have been so hard on El Matador's bosses. Max Payne had boss fights as well, and they were definitely sturdier than the regular enemies. At least El Matador provides a health meter for the boss, so you know whether you've made progress in the fight. That said, later levels and bosses do require some more thinking than jump with guns. Bullets hurt in this game, by the way. That's probably why the devs incorporated an armor system to insulate the player's health. It works like an extra health bar. Damage goes to armor before health takes any reduction. Don't fall for that 100 number value on armor though. You'll probably take 3 good hits before a full armor meter gets spent. You can get armor by picking up flak jackets in the game. It's really funny to see a flak jacket pop out of a dead enemy like a power-up in a game with such a gritty aesthetic.
So I finally get the girl at last.
Hey, how come you get to live it up while I'm out here working?
Anyway, I gotta go. Carter's well. I don't want to get hurt on the job.
Hey, fuck you, buddy.
Instead of painkillers, El Matador decided to play it safe and provide medkits to restore health. But they still use white cabinets to indicate where to find medkits. The devs knew who was going to play this game. Unlike painkillers, you can't carry medkits with you. You'll have to come back to any extra medkits you didn't use if you want to heal up after a hard fight. So what, or who, is El Matador? Imagine if Sicario wasn't smart.
Okay, Matador.
Matador.
It's what everyone calls you.
Great.
El Matador features DEA operative Victor Corbett. I like to call him Rico Rodriguez's less interesting cousin. Victor is a man of little words and even littler personality.
Fernandez, what's the situation?
It looks like you're gonna die.
Tetris pieces have more dimension than Victor. He's less a man and more a force of nature. He earned the title El Matador because he always ends up the lone survivor in any sting operation. Victor and his partner Rico, no, not that Rico, though I swear he looks like Junior from Reno 911, are on loan to Colombia's anti-drug task force to take down the local cartel, La Veladora. Victor's reputation must precede him because everyone at the task force already hates him. Benicio takes every opportunity to give Victor shit. Mia hates Victor because... The chief hates him so fucking much, and Victor doesn't even do anything. He doesn't even say anything cocky in his first meeting with the team.
There will be a meeting at the Paradiso Hotel, and El Corsario is due to take part in it. You'll join the unit that's monitoring the meeting. Just as an observer, okay?
We have met here to discuss the operation.
Before we start, allow me to demonstrate
Our readiness. In any case, we are and will always be one step ahead the police.
Yeah, of course you are.
Therefore, I can tell you that we are being watched.
What? But there's no need to
Concern about it.
Missile! Missile!
I'll be outside.
What the hell are you doing there? We've lost the signal.
Those bastards have a bazooka. Salgado and Broca are dead and burnt to
Are you
pieces.
kidding? We lost 5 men finding out where those bastards are going to be today, and you fuck it up. Stay where you are. We'll be there any minute. Personally.
I need to shoot some scum.
Oh shit! Don't you even think about it.
It's like that one version of Bulletstorm where you can replace the main character with Duke Nukem, and everyone's still acting as if they're talking to the shitty protagonist of the game, but all Duke replies is, "Blow it out your ass." I want to bring up some of the odd issues I have with El Matador. Even though my overall opinion on the game has drastically shifted, I still find these issues to stick out. First, look at all these weapons. Pretty cool, right? Well, everything in the assault rifle section uses the same ammo pool. There really is no need to have all these variations of guns for this kind of game. Look at Max Payne's inventory at the end. Every gun has a purpose, and those that are part of the same class are either direct upgrades or have nuances to their attacks that give the player options. A pump-action shotgun holds more rounds per reload, but it's got a slower firing cycle. A sawed-off shotgun needs to reload after 2 shots, but you can fire off both barrels almost simultaneously for those oh shit moments when an enemy appears in front of you. Why do I have a regular AR-15 and an AR-15 with a scope? Why do I have a regular Kalashnikov and a paratrooper variant? And why do all of these automatic weapons have the ability to switch firing modes? This is way too much variety for one class of weapon, especially when they all share the same ammo pool. Why not give me the paratrooper Kalashnikov in burst fire and the scoped AR-15 in semi-auto, so I can assign one gun for CQB or intermediate distances and the other gun for long-range shots? This is probably the best time to show off how powerful headshots are in this game. I can mag dump my MP5 into this guy, or I can just cherry tap his dome with a pistol. This also fed into my assumption that I had to play this game like a cover shooter. I killed these guys so fast using headshots that their voice clips are like 4 seconds behind. Also, this isn't me hating the game, but I gotta give it to both El Matador and Dead to Rights for incorporating the Pancore jackhammer shotgun that Max Payne made so popular. It's such a good look and everyone knew that. I get the feeling the art team was just going nuts when making the assets, because why else would there be so many rifle models in this game? That goes for all the car models as well. This car is way too nice to not end up on cinder blocks in this part of town. Hell, one of the levels ends up in a World War II museum, and all the pieces on exhibit are models of World War II guns, artillery, and equipment. You could totally reuse these models and make a full-on World War II game with them if you wanted. Like, I hate to say that El Matador has no personality. Its environments can have some character in certain areas, but you're so caught up in the non-stop combat that you never really get a chance to appreciate the environment art in the church where you have a massive shootout with Elton John. I'm not kidding when I call the combat non-stop. Max Payne's early game spread combat out with exploration, and it wasn't until the last act where the action became persistent. Every level in El Matador feels like the final act. The beginning parts to some chapters have some build-up, but this game is pure action, for better or worse. The second chapter starts at an industrial park, and features a chopper fight like it's boneless Metal Gear Solid. Once that fight's over, a cleanup crew arrives to finish off the player. Once you're done with that fight, you scale down the fire escape and meet up with some friendly NPCs to do another fight in the adjacent lot. This is the game. It's one set piece after another, with no other story to connect them besides stop the bad guys. There's a story here, but it's all just backdrop to justify the gameplay. There's no deep message or intricate plot to explore in El Matador. Every chapter features a particular target who's key to La Veladora's operations. Bless their hearts, they try to be memorable, but out of all of them, I could only remember Elton John and the Nazi guy, because he's a Nazi, and his villa has a World War II museum with German artillery and weapons, and he's got an elite guard of Ilsas because the devs knew exactly what kind of game they were making.
I've never cared much for Nazis.
Just like how Max Payne had a separate tutorial level, El Matador goes the extra step to make the level diegetic and play like boot camp. It does some interesting stuff like explain how damage and armor factor into gameplay, but because you're not fighting live targets, you don't get the wake-up call of how strong enemy fire is in the game until you play the campaign. Something I appreciate, but wish the game did more, was be really generous with the stronger weapons. That chopper fight on the roof gives you more rockets than you'll ever need to take it down, and the game was nice enough to let me keep those rockets until the end of the chapter. So what do you do when life hands you rockets? You share it with the rest of the class.
Oh shit, Rico! I nearly shot you.
I don't think so. I am immortal. What?
Rico!
This is my favorite scene in the game. It's a callback to the prologue mission, set in a Mexican nightclub that sits on top of a medieval torture dungeon, where Rico and Victor had a similar situation, but Victor was in trouble at that time. After I killed Benicio, turns out he worked for the chief this whole time, and the chief wanted to take over drug operations once Victor finished cleaning up La Veladora. I can't even call this a spoiler, at least the game is going somewhere. Anyways, after I killed Benicio, I gave one last farewell look to Rico, and... Is that a medkit? Did he fucking drop a medkit? This is Minecraft adventure mode levels of comedy. The only way this could have been funnier is if Rico dropped the flak jacket in the cutscene when he died. Something I didn't mention about this game's issues is that its event triggers are super fucked. They're so fucked, I can't even call them a bad thing. I've run so far ahead of a given level before the game can catch up that enemies have spawned on top of me. Back to that fight in the industrial park. The intended path is to cross over to the next part of the lot, climb up a tower, fight the enemies that spawn, rush down the tower, fight the next batch of spawned enemies, and then enter the warehouse and fight those enemies. But sometimes, this door to the warehouse opens up, and you can run through the warehouse and fight the enemies that spawn in it. Don't jump onto this box though, because the game doesn't recognize that as a place you can access, and will trap you there. So after going through the alternate route, I wondered, will these enemies spawn again if I go through the other path? So I tested it out, and yes, they will. This game didn't expect me to backtrack, so it never turned off the volume trigger when I entered through this door. This game is something else.
But I had an overwhelming sense of deja vu, and the caller's voice sounded oddly familiar.
I feel like I owe El Matador an apology. For years, I wrote this game off as kusoge, but it's actually not that bad of a game once I understood how to engage its mechanics. That opening area in the prologue, it gave me mixed signals, but after playing around enough, I learned that shoot dodging is just as viable in El Matador as it would be in Max Payne. I just had to be smart about when to use it. Final boss fight with the chief is still some bullshit on both runs though. I abused the AI on both occasions, and I'm not ashamed to admit that. Is El Matador worth playing? It's $4 on Steam and goes pretty cheap. Because it's pretty derivative of Max Payne's gameplay, expect a lot of trial and error experimentation, by which I mean save often and save in iterations. Yeah, I'd say play it. If you're nostalgic for some Max Payne, but are traumatized at the blood maze sections like I am, play El Matador. Also, fuck that first part of the final level in Max Payne, where they got those guards shooting grenade launchers like it's fucking Anor Londo. Fuck those guys.